an education herself beyond 6 years of elementary school. One of 4 children raised on a little farm in the old country, her parents could afford to educate only every other child, and she was the other. Her older brother became a carpenter's apprentice, and her sister went to nursing school. But she and her younger brother stayed home to help herd the sheep and harvest potatoes. The war came and shattered lives. Years later, this uneducated young woman found herself in the big city in a foreign country halfway around the world. At the age of 23, she had married her childhood sweetheart the day before fleeing their homeland. They had expected to share the rough journey together, but on boarding the refugee train, the men were separated from the women. My mother spent the next 5 years searching for her husband, her brothers, or any living relative. She never found any, so eventually she traveled to America. Alone. 10 stormy days crossing the ocean. In Shakespeare's words, tempest-tossed. Although my mother must have been terrified many times, my favorite recollections are of her spunk, like the time she refused to give up her purse to a would-be mugger. Not surprisingly, I inherited her mix of fearlessness and fearfulness. The dangerous ghetto environment that I grew up in did not scare me, but bridges, elevators, even cars did. A thunderstorm would have me running into the basement, and any insect would have me running out of the house. I walked the dark streets alone at night, but could not sleep without the reassuring sound of a little black-and-white TV, to the chagrin of my sister, with whom I shared a bedroom. My list of personal phobias was quite long. At the top of the list, inspired by my mother's terrifying ocean journey, was boats. 20 years later, when I first entered a prison, I was less frightened by the convicts staring at me behind the bars of their cells than I was by the rickety elevator that took me to my basement classroom. I started doing volunteer work in Chicago's Cook County Jail because of an argument with my husband's friend, John Bergman, a theater practitioner working in maximum security prisons. "Those guys are beyond rehabilitation," I insisted. "You should focus on first-time offenders." And, to test my own hypothesis, that's what I did. At the time, I could not have imagined that eventually I would be working in supermax, that is, the long-term solitary confinement unit, the prison within the prison. In prison, I was again fearless in an environment where most people would be fearful, and maybe that is why I was able to successfully reach those prisoners when others could not. I also recalled my mother's words about education. Like war refugees, prisoners have lost everything: home, possessions, friends, and often family. For a prisoner, education has a special value as the one thing that no one can take from him. When I began my journey into prison in 1983, I tutored first-time offenders in a basic literacy program through the PACE Institute at Chicago's Cook County Jail. PACE is an acronym for Programmed Activities in Correctional Education. I discovered that some of the prisoners I worked with were from my old neighborhood, and, in a strange way, I felt at home. I felt much less comfortable when 10 years later I went back to school to finish the college education I had discontinued to take on a full-time job. My goal was to complete that bachelor's degree so I could continue on toward a PhD, making up for my mother's lack of education in an incongruous way. While negotiating the unfamiliar terrain of academia and grappling with unfamiliar concepts such as literary theory, I once again returned to the more familiar ground of prison in 1993. This time I was inspired by a comment made in a lecture by a famous literary scholar who asserted that Shakespeare's play Macbeth represented the ipso facto valorization of transgression. He seemed to be suggesting that Macbeth's acts of transgression, murder, were worthy of praise, but I couldn't help feeling that real-life transgressors would disagree, that they would feel that valorization of transgression was anything but ipso facto.